Hello everyone, welcome to Beyond Binary Thinking, because the world is filled with revolutionary ideas, so we should never be forced to listen to the charlatans that try to force us to pick a side in a false binary dichotomy. So let's go around briefly, everyone introduce themselves, and as it's the topic today, let's talk about our relationships to religion and communism briefly. So I'll start. I'm Chris. I'm a Christian, Buddhist, agnostic, pantheist, socialist. Brenton.
Hi, my name is Brent Lengel. I am a poet, playwright, and Ringo Award nominated comic creator. Also, I debate weirdos on the far right online quite frequently. I had my embarrassing new atheist phase starting around in 2010, but by 2014, I became a practicing Buddhist with Soka Gakkai. This is a lay Buddhist sect in New York. We have no priests, we have no spiritual hierarchy, and we don't build temples, we build community centers. So that's a lot of fun. Also, fun fact, our founder died in Japanese prison because he refused to recognize the Japanese emperor as a living god. So, I do philosophy, talk about Buddhism, and make comics like Snow White Zombie Apocalypse and my most recent Durruti Shadow of the People about anarchist Buenaventura Durruti. Was raised Catholic, so I lapsed pretty hard, but have a decent amount of education in Christianity for lay people. So this will be a very interesting discussion.
And you're a full-blown capitalist, right? Like
the closest thing... Well, technically, yes, because I own my own business. But the closest thing to me politically would be an anarcho-communist in the kind of Kropotkinite tradition. I'm also really into Alan Watts, who is also identifies as a Kropotkinite. So you may, if anybody's familiar with Alan Watts, you may hear ideas similar to his come out of my mouth. And part of that is, just synchronicity. And part of it is me just shamelessly quoting him because he's one of the most brilliant people I've ever encountered.
Super. Wonderful introduction. Thank you very much, Brent. Let's go over to Matthew next then.
Yeah, my name is Matthew J. Distefano. I'm an author, a podcaster. I do social work, generally working with low income, elderly folks, disabled folks here in California. I don't know where I fall on the political spectrum. I'm very interested in Tolkien and Watts, and I like their political philosophies. I don't know.
Get along.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, once you mentioned Alan Watts, I was like, oh, these are my people. So I'm a bit of an enigma, I guess, in that way. When you said anarcho-communist, I was like, oh, that sounds good. And my background and dealings with Christianity is from evangelicalism. I got out of that maybe 10 years ago and have deconstructed that entire worldview. And to now, whatever I am, I study all faith traditions, Buddhism, Sufism. I do write for Pathos on the Progressive Christian channel, though I don't necessarily self-identify as a Christian. I don't think about these terms on my day-to-day. I try to do good in my community, and that's about it. But I do know a lot about Christian theology, so it will be fun to talk about that with you all.
Thank you very much. And then over to you, Reverend Charley.
Hi. So thanks for inviting me on the, excuse me. We've got a lot of allergies now in the Chicago area, and my voice is hit or miss. Sorry.
Good,
and so, I'm Reverend Charley Earp. I live in Evanston, Illinois, on the north border of the city of Chicago. I have lived in Chicago for a long stretch, but my wife works at Northwestern University, so we're here. After my kids are grown up, they all live in the city. My background is I was raised Pentecostal preacher's kid, died in the wool fundamentalist for quite a while. I went to Bible college, dropped out because I didn't like it because the right wing was starting to take over. This was 1981. And I was leaning kind of in I don't know, almost apolitical, but also with a bit of utopian ideals, which in the early 80s, after I got married, after we had our first kid, I wanted to live with a commune, and I'd wanted to live with a commune since I was like 16 and encountered my first Christian rock band that was part of a commune. They're still around. They're called the Jesus People USA. They're based in Chicago. I still have a friend or two there. But in '86, my wife, my daughter, and I moved from Dallas, Texas, where we were living. I'm from Texas originally, but in and out a lot. And joined or moved to live with a Mennonite commune in the city of Evanston. So an urban commune is a bit of an unusual idea, but it actually works really well. They've been together since 1957 and are still together. I think their actual communal membership is under 100, but they have a church that is even bigger. And that was where I got introduced to liberation theology, which if you really know theology, you've heard of it. So that, and actually I'd heard of it before coming to Reba, but I hadn't really dug into it. And I read a little book called Communism in the Bible by Jose Porfirio Miranda, who is a Mexican liberation theologian. And I said, oh, I guess I'm a communist. So originally I would have understood that to be anarcho-communist. I was kind of hostile to the state, which is real easy to do in the United States because everybody from the right to the left kind of hates the state of the United States. But I would say I moderated on the anti-state part. You know, I did need food stamps and unemployment checks for a good fraction of my life. I've lived in poverty most of my adult life, partly because of mental illness, but not just, because it's really hard when you're a college dropout, and I was a college dropout. I actually have never finished an undergrad degree, but I do have a Master of Divinity from a Unitarian Universalist seminary, which is my denomination currently. I am a newly fellowship minister. I got fellowshipped in 2019 in the Unitarian Universalist Association, and currently not serving a congregation, but I've actually have had 5 or 6 interviews in the past few weeks. So let's hope that this is the year I get a full-time job, or at least close to full-time. One church has already said they're going to make an offer, but if somebody beats them to the punch, I may have to say sorry. And that's a good place to be. I've never been in that place before. Yeah. I do a lot of online ministry. I have a YouTube channel, which is, I call it the Church of the Revolution. You see my name over here and all that. And I'm writing a book, which I hope to have published in the next few weeks, self-published through Kindle, because Kindle will let you print and be an ebook, and without any money really. So
Amazon.
Yeah, with Amazon, the horrible capitalist pigs. Yes, I know. I hate them, but they're becoming unionized. Let's hope. Yeah, I don't know what else. You can ask me a million other questions, and obviously we will.
And we will, mate. That was a wonderful introduction. Thank you very much. So, yeah, no, obviously, I've had the good pleasure of checking out all of your gentlemen's content. I'm a big fan of all of you.
Thank you.
For those that are less aware of me, I set up this podcast because I hate debates. For me, it's the worst way to get to the truth. I'm a big fan, anytime there's a controversial or contentious subject, of just calmly conversing and exploring the nuance and trying to find out some truth.
You're dead to me, Chris.
Well, that's because you're wrong, Brent, and I'm right. So.
Boom,
So yeah, it's all about going beyond the binary thinking. Although, yes, conversely, I have enjoyed watching Brenton slam dunk on a few Nazis. But yeah,
I'm glad someone enjoyed that.
Would like to kick this off with a fun-like game. Gentlemen, if you can please guess whether the following quotes come from the Bible or Karl Marx. I won't be keeping score, but yeah, this is fun. So, to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his ability. I think this is far too easy for the Reverend Charley. Anyone else got a guess?
Well, it's not Marx.
Yeah, that's the Bible.
One of the Gospels. I forget which one, but yeah.
It's Matthew.
It's Matthew, yeah.
And they sold their possessions and goods and distributed them all, as any had seen.
That's the Bible.
There you go. That is also the Bible.
Book of Acts, golden key text for Christian communists.
Mm-hmm. I believe that's around verse 432, I think.
There's two similar verses, one in chapter 2, one in chapter 4.
Yeah, it's the chapter 2 one. All right, I'll give bonus points to Charley there. So, do not rob the poor.
That's James.
That's
There you go. Whoever oppresses the poor to increase his own wealth or gives to the rich will only come to poverty.
Oh, that's Proverbs, right?
Yes. So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
trick
Sorry,
here,
I'm a
it's all good.
theologian and a
Of
preacher's
course.
kid. So
The trick
the
here, and I
trick-
could go on, is that these are all from the Bible.
Yeah, the trick there with the, because it sounded like Marx. The last one sounded like Marx, but then I realized we'll only go to poverty, and Marx would have been like, no, you can exploit the workers to wealth. That's in fact what most people do. Well, most capitalists.
most capitalists want to go there, but they do. Most of them end up in poverty as well. So most businesses fail. Not an admitted fact often.
So, gentlemen, I just know with you three live wires, and not myself, I never go off on tangents, but with you gentlemen, I'm going to have to rein you in. So we will just start just briefly going around and everyone's sort of initial thoughts on the idea of, was Jesus a communist? Who would like to start?
I can.
Yeah.
I have when you invited me onto the show, I thought about that, and I didn't know how to answer it because my first question back would be, well, what do you mean by communism? Because generally speaking, when people Jesus's context was, I mean, it's a bit anachronistic, right? To use modern terms to describe ancient people. I would say in many ways, yes, but I would say generally Jesus's teachings weren't directed towards the state, and generally we think of the state when it comes to communism. So in a way, I suppose it could be, but I think we would have to nuance the general consensus definition of what communism is, I guess.
I'm all about the nuance, and you can't have a philosophical debate without defining our terms. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I'll go next. That way we can let the good Reverend have the last word here, since he's the one who actually knows about this stuff. So I would say, based upon my understanding of communism, you've got like the actual physical state of communism, which is a classless, stateless, moneyless society where the goods and services are distributed from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. And that was not the world that Jesus lived in. And then you have the ideology to bring about this world. And I would say Jesus would probably be very sympathetic to people who had that ideology. And, as Matt mentioned, communism, it's difficult to project a current idea on historical figures, but also the ideas of communism predate Karl Marx. I mean, we go back, I think, as far as Euripides. There's mentions of communism or something very like communism. So I think Jesus probably would have been aware of the sort of communist lifestyle in his time, but I would say overall, he was less focused on creating a specific political state of affairs and more on bringing about a change in consciousness where one essentially rethinks their relationship with the external world and each other, and comes to basically all of the conclusions of communism, not as a specific like ideology, but more as like, yeah, of course you're going to do that. Right. So I really would say that Jesus's teachings lead to a communist society, but not in a prescriptive way, but in a practical way, as in if you practice Jesus's teachings, give no thought to the morrow, for if God so clothed the lilies of the field, will he not clothe you, O ye of little faith? I think that, you will find that people would naturally fall into living as communists, whether they had the word or the concept or not, if they really understood the Gospels, at least as I have interpreted them and several other people, including Alan Watts.
Reverend, it's over to you. You are on mute. So there you go.
Yeah, I have a fan going in the background, so I worry that it's a little too loud. Because we are in the middle of summer here, and I don't want to turn the air conditioning on. That's really loud. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to talk about the word communism. The word communism, as far as we can tell, was coined in the 1790s by a philosopher, sociologist, but back then all those terms were kind of complicated, who was describing two things: monasteries and military barracks. He used the word communism in French, he was French, to describe those two kinds of living styles. And then the term got plucked out of that initial sort of technical use and became applied to Anabaptists. There were Anabaptists who lived in common, and in the early Christians, it was applied to them. By the middle of the first third of the 1800s, during some of the French Revolution and so on. So there was actually a Christian communist movement, and Karl Marx talks about it in the middle of the 1800s, in the 1840s, when he's creating his point of view. And he admits that communism emerged among these Christian radicals in France, but he, being a good, enlightened Feuerbachian atheist, was going to transform communism into a truly political, secular thing. And that's his whole project, is taking this Christian idea and secularizing it. So that's one. So what I would say based on that is Jesus came up with communism in what you say practical terms, and it migrated through history to kick off this movement that Marx himself adopted to modernity. Now, how do I claim that Jesus was a communist? And my golden Bible passage is in the book of Luke, chapter 6. And I'm going to read from the Contemporary English Version. Jesus looked at his disciples and said, "God will bless you people who are poor. His kingdom belongs to you. God will bless you hungry people. You will have plenty to eat. God will bless you people who are now crying, for you will laugh. God will bless you when others hate you and won't have anything to do with you. God will bless you when people insult you and say cruel things about you because you are my follower. Long ago, your own people did these things to the prophets. But you rich people are in for trouble. You've already had an easy life. You well-fed people are in for trouble because you will go hungry. You people who are laughing now are in for a lot of trouble because you are going to cry and weep." I'm going to stop there. Jesus makes a clear distinction between the wealthy and the poor, the oppressor and the oppressed in that passage. And he promises that God is going to intervene in history to set things right. Now, that is a messianic passage, if there ever was one, and it centers poverty. Unlike the Gospel of Matthew, that says, "God will bless you, poor people who are poor in your spirits," right? He uses the phrase, he qualifies poverty with poverty of spirit, which Luke doesn't. And I think Luke is the older version and Matthew is modifying it. So at any rate, I think that that's a process that began pretty early, is modifying the teachings of Jesus, making them less radical. I recommend a great book called Zealot by Reza Aslan, who talks about the messianic movements who preceded Jesus and how he was just one more of them, saying we want to kick the Romans out and start building the kingdom of heaven on earth. Okay, I'm done. And sorry, you asked for a preacher, you're going to get a sermon.
Nothing to apologize for whatsoever. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. We touched upon some of this conversation in my chat with Matthew. This one, not the gospel Matthew, just to clarify. It's interesting because, reading the Bible, one of the things I remember specifically being taught was, render unto Caesar, right? This phrase, which is like, but what about taxes? And it's like, yes, you should pay your taxes. I'm talking about something different that should be separated from the power structure. And I remember as a child, like reading, I was 14, 15, listening to Rage Against the Machine. So I was like, yeah, Jesus is my guy, right? And then suddenly in Bible study, as you get older, they start being like, okay, so we've sold you on Jesus, but now here's why you should pay your taxes and support the state. And I was like, this feels like a gear change to me, and I get it, it's written by multiple people, but it definitely feels like an editor coming in somewhere and being like, but nay, like, enough of the radicalism, pay your taxes and be a good citizen. And even then, honestly, I was like, if I was in charge of the Holy Roman Empire, recently rebranded from the not so Holy Roman Empire, might I tweak that passage just a tad? I mean, is that completely crazy, or is that a common reading?
I mean, if you think like these documents we have with the four Gospels, in their time, this was like the internet. Like this was how people were expressing themselves and communicating with others. So, if you are a ruler who wants to keep being a ruler and is invested in keeping the social hierarchy the way it is, you're definitely going to look to bend the popular media, and in this way, the popular religions, to your will. Just as we've seen in the last, I think, 200 years, Christianity has taken a major right turn, like popular Christianity in the United States. It wasn't always like that, and I think that
I would specify the United States. So in Europe, Christianity still leans heavily left, anti-war.
Because everything is better in Europe. Thank you very much. Except you live on Turf Island, so I can feel a little bit superior as an American there. But yeah, I mean, in the United States, Christianity took a huge right turn over the past 100, 200 years. And that, we have the receipts on that. That switch, is documented. We know the preachers involved. We know the various industrialists who paid them. So I would say if that happened in contemporary society, I would not at all be surprised if that happened, in the ancient Near East.
Yeah, and I would not disagree with you, and I would add that sometimes things are said, like I think Paul has his whole chapter in Romans 13, and that's one that's also used. I mean, conservative Christians use it when Republicans are in charge. They don't do it when Democrats are in charge. This is part of the cherry picking methodology. But I would say sometimes there's also, I mean, let's just say that Jesus actually said these things and Paul meant these things. I would sometimes give the same advice too. Like, I think you can be radical and also be like, well, but you better pay your taxes or you'll go to jail, and then what? Like, I'm not going to jail or prison or something because I got a kid, I got to work, I got to do all these things. So sometimes I would hesitate to say that just because someone said something doesn't mean that that's what they necessarily believe in an ideal situation. Like, again, I would never give counsel and be like, yes, please stop paying your taxes. And when the IRS comes, like, then what? Like, just because you stand for something, it's not always a good idea to follow through that. And sometimes it is worth it to get arrested. I have friends who get arrested and protest and do all this kind of thing too. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I would just advise, and maybe Jesus was advising, yeah, if we're going to get anywhere with this, we got to pay our taxes in the meantime, right?
Yeah, you just also pick your battles, though. Honestly, right. And this is something that I was actually told by a preacher. I went to an all-boys boarding school in high school, and they forced us to take a religion class, which I thought I was going to hate, but then really wound up enjoying it. And he pointed out,
oh, yeah. Hi, me too. Yeah.
Yeah. He the preacher there pointed out, he was an Episcopalian, and he said, like, well, if you look at this, these Pharisees are trying to get Jesus to say something that they can put him in jail with, so they're asking him these questions. And if he answers one way, the Romans will come and grab him and throw him in jail. And if he answers the other way, all these radical people who have followed him will abandon him because suddenly, he's not doing what they expect their Messiah to do. So when he says, like, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, you can actually interpret that as basically a very clever, politically charged dodge. So they're saying, like, hey, should we pay our taxes? And Jesus says, well, you should give God God's stuff and give Caesar Caesar's stuff. You figure it out. So really, it may be because he spoke in so many parables that he was specifically not answering the question because he saw the trap that they set up.
And I think that's a great point. Sorry, Charley.
I would point out that for Jews, everything actually belonged to God, and Caesar didn't own anything. So the Jews read it one way, the Romans would read it a different way. And the Romans' interpretation that he was dividing religion from politics, that became the standard interpretation. But that was, if you know Judaism, that was in no way apolitical. It was very clear that God's above Caesar.
That's awesome. I was not aware of that tradition in Judaism, which just makes that whole moment even better.
Can I pick up on that though? Because I think that's a very interesting issue with the interpretation of religion, right? So I found you, I like what you're saying. It resonates with my current vibe and how I want to see the world and how I wish the world could be. It resonates with my favorite passages of the Bible, and I sort of tie that together in a loosely held, cherry-picked framework that makes me feel good about myself and my beliefs. We know there are people who have a very different interpretation of the Bible and a very different set of politics and cherry-pick from that set. So, like, are we all just doing that, finding our favorite thing from a book that's very easy to interpret because there's a lot of weird, vague statements in it?
Well, this is why Marxism is so important for me, because Marxism is an analysis of the economic, political history of humanity, particularly humanity as centered around Europe and its predecessors, which would include the early Christians, because Friedrich Engels in particular talked a lot about the early Christians. Marx, not so much. Marx was in a certain way running from religion because it's complicated. He was the grandson of a Jewish rabbi, but his dad had converted to be a lawyer because you had to convert in Prussia, wherever they lived, to get a state job, and that was what he did. So he was raised Christian and even wrote a lovely poem to Jesus when he was a teenager. I've read it. You can look it up. Just, Karl Marx's poem about union with Christ. Read, it's there. But he ran the other way. Other than the famous opiate of the masses, he really didn't say a lot about religion. There are a few other things you can find. He really liked Prometheus, for example. But taking a historical social framework in mind, the Jewish people were a colonized, marginalized minority who had religiously weird ideas according to the official Roman state. All they asked is that you worship Caesar and acknowledge he was sent by the gods to rule the empire, and whatever you believed is fine. The Jews really had a hard time with that. They say, no, we don't recognize any god, but the God who created the earth, right? For everybody. They really had, I think, something of an egalitarian streak, even if it was clothed in a lot of patriarchy, which you can find all over the Bible, and clothed, in other kinds of. The fact is now in the 21st century, we are now where we at with capitalism threatening to destroy all living species through climate change and exploitation and industrialization. And any Christianity that thinks, are Christians who think, oh, this is just the stage for the Armageddon and apocalypse. And I'm like, yeah, I was raised that way. And that's not what Jesus, yes, there are going to be dark days ahead. Absolutely. Who would have thought that Russia would invade Ukraine, right? I kind of knew they would, and they did steal Crimea. So it should have been obvious they would try again. But war is always just a click away from happening again. And that said, I believe in the potential of the masses and humanity, the working class, the poor and the oppressed, someday rising up and throwing off their chains. And hence I am a Christian communist.
To play off that, actually, and I'm going to kind of reference my my Buddhism, because you'll notice, in Japan, when Japan went fascist, what was it that they said to Makaguchi, the founder of Soka Gakkai? Well, he had to put a little charm on his shrine acknowledging the divinity of the emperor, and of course approving of all of the horrible fascist things Japan was doing at that time. And both Makaguchi and his right-hand man Joshi Toda refused, and Makaguchi died in Japanese prison, and Toda came out, having been enlightened within the prison, and rebuilt Soka Gakkai to the point that we are now the largest lay Buddhist organization in the world. Actually, we're in 192 countries. So what's very important to understand about this, and this has kind of been, I guess, my concept of religion, it is that your religious beliefs are your external religious beliefs are an expression of your internal state as a person. So people will read the Bible and take completely different perspectives away from it because of where they are personally. This ties into a doctrine that we have about the 10 worlds. Used to be believed these were literal places you could go. Most Buddhists, and especially Buddhists from my sect, see this as metaphorical for states of the human mind. And it's the world is broken up into 10 different states, going all the way from hell and hungry ghosts all the way up to bodhisattva and Buddha. So what is essentially being talked about there is that the world that we live in, the external world that we experience, is not one way all the time for each internal person, but in fact, it moves from one, paradigm of interacting with it to the other based upon where you are as that localized center of consciousness. So, each of the 10 worlds, and this is another very important doctrine, it's called Ichinen Sanzen, 10,000 worlds in a single moment of life. What winds up happening is that each world contains the other 9. So when you are in hell, you also have heaven, and you've got Buddha and Bodhisattva. And similarly, when you are in any one of these other ones, if you're in the Deva world, the heaven realm, hell is there. And in fact, Watts talks about, and when I'm talking about hell, again, I'm talking internal, not a literal place with a bad guy running around in it. But Watts talks about, when you are in the Deva world, the world of desire fulfilled, there's really nowhere else for you to go without doing the important spiritual work that brings you into the higher realms, like the Bodhisattva and Buddha realms. So once you're at the top of society, there's nowhere to go but down, and eventually you, as in your consciousness, will descend into the hell realms, and you'll kick around there for a while, because when you're in hell, that's where you want to be, and then you may move to another. So the key thing that I'm saying here is that if someone is in hell, and this might be as if they are like a Nazi, when they go and they read the Bible, they take the hellish interpretation of it. When someone is in the Deva world, they take, I would guess virtuous, personally virtuous interpretation of what they read, what they've read. So they would take a lot of good things from it, but also they would come at it from a very egotistical perspective, where it's all about them, and they may miss other people or even important things about themselves because they're just too happy. That's one of the really key things, and one of the things that I love about Shakyamuni Buddha is that it's not just the negative things about the world that trap you in the cycle of samsara, of death and rebirth. The positive things also trap you there. So really, with regard to negative karma and positive karma, the idea is to get off the ride rather than keep going round and round in the rat race. Yeah.
But to pick on that though, again, I could still imagine, right, a fire and brimstone preacher thinking that your interpretation is the hell version because you're colluding with homosexuals and
but where is that preacher when he's making that pronouncement? He's I would guess, actually, if it's a hell and brimstone preacher, I'd say that's in the realm of the asheras, which is essentially arrogance, where you start to develop spiritually, but it's it's a very egotistical version of it, where think about Twitter when they're canceling someone. That's the world of the asheras. That's the self-righteous activists that nobody's good enough for.
I love this comparison with social media and religion. And what I picked up on as well, which I think is perhaps more interesting for this discussion, although we'll allow everyone to reply to what Brent just said. Talking about how, I was saying how individuals interpret religion and cherry pick it, and of course everyone does. But the interesting thing is how power structures cherry pick who they hold up as their religiously powerful person, right? Who becomes head of the Church of England? Which Buddhists do they pick during World War II to be like, cool, so anyone who's with the war, anyone who's against the war, kill those guys. Anyone else? No, you guys are with us? Cool. This guy's now the head of the Buddhist temple. Listen to what he has to say, right? And
you know, a lot of there was a
people
nasty
abusing religion, but the power structures are using it for their own gain as well. Right?
I mean, there was a very nasty fascist Buddhist faction like within Japan. You know, like there were Buddhists who absolutely approved of, for instance, the kamikaze attacks, and you know, several of the kamikazes were Buddhists and were, you know,
more recently in Myanmar, the genocide of the Rohingya, and it's surprising everything I know about Buddhism to hear that yes, just senior monks combined with military dictatorship were involved in a genocide. So
well,
the
you
devil
know,
may cite scripture for its purpose.
This goes back to Nichiren Daishonin, who lived in like the 12th century in Japan. And he specifically talked about how we were basically living in the latter day of the law. And even though there were as many priests as bamboo shoots, like the country was completely going to hell, and the true teaching of the Buddha had been lost. So yeah, I mean, you can definitely have people who are nominally Buddhist who don't practice it or who have failed to understand it, or who simply, you know, have fallen into a particular type of wrong view. But I would say that if you do understand, like, the sutras within the context that they were created, you know, the idea of a war makes absolutely no sense. It would be like if all the cells in your body just suddenly decided to start fighting each other for no reason. You know, oh, hey, autoimmune disease. So, you know,
that is a thinly veiled critique of Christianity using Buddhism as a metaphor. I'll allow the gentleman to reply.
Well, I mean, going back to your original, everyone approaches their scriptures subjectively, right? If there are objective truths in the world, we only approach them subjectively because we are subjective observers and partakers of the universe. So, I mean, a lot of, you know, so in Western Christianity, a lot of the approach to the Bible is the conservative right cherry picks certain things, and the progressive left cherry picks certain things. And a lot of people, I think, fall for the mistake of not allowing the Bible to be a messy collection of books that doesn't get everything correct. And so for like my approach to, you know, exegesis and hermeneutics is like, just let the Bible be what it is. Like if it says something terrible against women, like that's what it was. And it's not perfect. Like, I think Paul does get a bad rap, but I don't think he had his view of men and women correct 100%. I personally don't think the Bible has anything to say about LGBTQ because this is not a concept, you know, in that time, you know. So I try to approach the Bible as what does this passage say and what is the context in which it's written? What is going on? What are the power dynamics between rich men and young boys when he talks about quote unquote homosexual, you know, acts or whatever. So I just let the Bible be what it is. And it's ultimately, if I was Buddhist, if I was Christian, if I'm Muslim, like, why is our authority our scripture? Because all the mystics revere scriptures, but it's not their ultimate authority.
Right.
So I would rather look at all the mystics in the traditions and say, I think they're onto something because they A, respect the scriptures and let them be what they are, and B, it's not the ultimate authority in their lives whether they're going to be a moral, good, upstanding citizen.
So I mean, we talked about this last time, Matthew, but isn't this a sad irony that Jesus again and again and again says, here's a rule in the sacred text, and he goes, not about that, it's about what's in your heart. Here's another rule in the sacred text. Sorry, it's not about that, it's what's in your heart. And then people are like, here's my sacred text, I'm going to use it to beat you over the head with. It's a sad irony of where we are in the world. Anyway, Charley, Reverend Charley.
Yeah, well, you don't have to call me Reverend. Charley is fine. I've only been.
Sorry, again, religious boarding school. It's very hard for me to not call you Reverend.
All right. In fact, yeah, I can't remember I guess my dad did use Reverend on occasion, but he actually, Pentecostals don't really as much. Anyway, I have two Buddhist notes before I launch into anything else. One is Tina Turner, Queen of Rock and Roll, was Soka Gakkai, or is Soka Gakkai, I believe.
Indeed she
so
is.
come on. I have the T-shirt. I'm not wearing it for this, but I love Tina Turner.
Hancock, by the way.
Oh, he is. Okay. And Chicago has a gigantic Soka Gakkai center. I haven't been there. I'm on the north side. It's on the near south side. But I have thought about it because there is a sangha in Evanston organized around Thich Nhat Hanh, Order of Interbeing, and I have been a few times, but I haven't. I don't know, the pandemic kind of they didn't do Zoom or anything, so I don't know what's going on with them now. They're the easiest group because they're accessible to me. And the other one is I have a Guanyin bracelet. I don't know, you probably can't see that, but I have a Guanyin bracelet. So
I actually had noticed it, though I didn't know it was Guanyin. So thanks.
Yeah. I heard the legend of Miao Shan, and I said, it's Jesus, but as a female Buddhist, right?
Yeah.
Anyway,
well, there's a very interesting passage in the Lotus Sutra about that, and it's I'm the specifics of the Lotus Sutra. It's very important, like that you don't take it literally. Because it's more a way of bringing you around to a proper way of thinking, as opposed to like a record of events as they had happened. But one of the things that it says, and very strongly implies, is that the Buddha is not simply Shakyamuni. The Buddha has existed probably before time, and it literally does say in the lifespan chapter, which is like the beating heart of Mahayana Buddhism, that the Buddha appears in different places under different names and teaches different doctrines. From this perspective, for instance, you could consider Jesus to be a bodhisattva. And I think there's a very strong case that could be made for that. So yeah, I mean, if there's a female Buddhist Jesus, yeah, absolutely. Even the crucifixion kind of works into that now that I think about it, but I'll stop derailing.
Whether you believe in the literal reincarnation of Buddha or subscribe to part of the idea of the Silk Road, and you had this wonderful combination of like Zoroastrianism, Judaism, and Buddhist traditions and teachings merging into wonderful wisdoms. Yeah, either way, it's a fascinating melting pot.
Well, Brent and I will. I'll be quick. I'm writing a book, and the first chapter is Jesus as the Bodhisattva. So I will have to make sure to send it to you. And if I'm way off base on something, let me have it.
And I'm gonna
love to see that.
I'm gonna jump in with another Buddhist thing, because I was a Christian, then I became an agnostic. And I even said non-theist for a while. And then I had this sort of re-encounter but then Buddhism was also in the mix, particularly one of the weirder Buddhists in the United States, Ken Wilber. I imagine you may have run across him, Brenton, or no? Ken Wilber?
No, the name doesn't ring a bell.
He's kind of, he got popular as sort of on the edge of the New Age movement. But anyway, but he has this notion of ascending consciousness, that you go through life and you develop higher consciousness. And so I read a lot of his stuff. I don't buy it all, but it's interesting. But the other thing that other Buddhists note is that I took a course at my seminary. So the Unitarian Universalist Association has a somewhat exchange relationship with the Rishu Kosekai in Japan, which is another Nichiren offshoot. And so I took a course on the Lotus Sutra from a Rishu Kosekai teacher who was based at the University of Chicago Divinity School, or maybe not Divinity School, but at any rate. So I spent the semester with the Lotus Sutra, and I wrote about the the similarities between the parables of the prodigal son and the parable of the two sons in the Lotus Sutra. I got an A, so
Yeah.
it's an easy A.
There goes my plan. I was planning on getting you gentlemen to fight, but
We're not
gonna fight.
There goes that plan.
I am Buddhist curious and even occasionally practice some Buddhism. I was a Quaker for a long time.
Oh, so
During
is my grandmother.
My agnostic period, right? It just sitting in silence was what I needed after years of Pentecostal Bible bashing of me. So that helped me deconstruct, as you used the term earlier, Matthew.
Yeah, I mean that's fascinating, and I would normally say this, and Matt, this was what I was getting at earlier, because you actually hit the nail on the head when you brought up the mystics. And I highly recommend, if I assume everyone here has read it, but if you haven't, please pick up Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. It is freaking phenomenal, and speaks in a lot of ways to the it's written as if it is a religious text, but it's of course a long narrative poem. But like, in my opinion, I think if you're doing religion right, all the religions are the same. It's when you do it wrong that we start branching off into a bunch of I guess the discord born of minor differences.
And that's hilarious, because as soon as I think of in my head someone that's doing religion wrong, even a broadly similar sect of Christianity isn't close enough for them. They're like, no,
Especially not.
Right.
We have minor differences, and that makes me very angry.
I've made the point that in terms of their worldview and the way they live their life, Thich Nhat Hanh and Richard Rohr are far closer than Richard Rohr and the Westboro Baptist Church. Rohr and the Westboro Baptist Church would both be Christians. Rohr Franciscan and the Westboro Baptist Church Baptist and insane. But Hahn before he passed away, and Richard Rohr, completely different faith traditions. However, I think they would see the world in a much more similar way than folks within certain denominations in Christianity or in any fundamentalist version of whatever faith tradition we're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree 100%.
And I think Marx, although Marx never said this, but I would sum up how you intersect Marx and theology and a study of religion. The class struggle goes on within each religion. There are the ruling elites trying to shut down the discontented masses, and the various ways of doing that, and the various ways of they resist and fight back, create new denominations. So, and Protestantism is a perfect example of all of that.
Yes, and likewise, there has been examples where the ruling class Christianity and colonialism have gone hand in hand, right?
Every
and I think that
fucking time, pardon my French.
Yeah, all good. And that's when Marx talks about the dangers of Christianity, as you said, he doesn't mention it a lot, but that's one of his things. I think, what's the quote I read, which I loved? To destroy Christianity, we must first destroy the British Empire.
Well, you're on it. You're on your way. You're on your way.
Oh, we're destroying ourselves.
that was my gist.
That's normally what empires do once they run out of enemies to fight.
The problem with capitalism, the problem with socialism, you run out of other people's money. The problem with capitalism, you run out of the one planet you have. So,
yeah. And especially since,
that's why they're obsessed with going to Mars.
Yeah, there isn't going to be a viable moon colony anytime soon. Maybe not. Maybe. I'm skeptical about it.
Mm-hmm. So there's one thing that I wanted to bring up here, and I think Charley, you're obviously going to know about this, and I think we alluded to it. But I always bring this up when I'm dealing with like a right-wing Christian. So this is Acts 4:32 to 5:11. I'm going to go as quickly as I can here. All believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. With the great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all that there were no needy persons among them. From time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales and put it at the apostles' feet, and everything was distributed to anyone who had need. And then a guy named Joseph, a Levite, comes and does this thing. But jumping to Acts 5. Now a man named Ananias, together with his wife Sapphira, also sold a piece of property. With his wife's full knowledge, he kept back part of the money for himself, but brought the rest and put it at the apostles' feet. Then Peter said, Ananias, how is it that Satan has so filled your heart that you have lied to the Holy Spirit and have kept for yourself some of the money you received for the land? Didn't it belong to you before it was sold? And after it was sold, wasn't the money at your disposal? What made you think of doing such a thing? You have not lied just to humans, but to God. When Ananias heard this, he fell down and died. And a great fear seized all that heard what had happened. Then some young men came forward, wrapped up his body, and carried him out and buried him. About 3 hours later, his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. Peter asked her, tell me, is this price you and Ananias got for the land? Yes, she said, that is the price. And Peter said, how could you conspire to test the Holy Spirit of the Lord? Listen, the feet of men who buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out also. At that moment, she fell down at his feet and died. So God will kill you for not being a communist, and simply just doing charity and giving most of your money to the church as opposed to all of your money. And you'll talk to a conservative Christian, they're like, well, no, but he lied. And it's like, yeah, lied about what? It's like what you say to people who try to defend like the Confederacy. Like, it's about states' rights. Yes, states' rights to do what?
Slavery.
Yeah. So like, I really don't know how anybody can read that and maintain the idea that God guarantees private property and rewards people with wealth.
Yeah, and there's plenty in the
Matthew,
Hebrew scriptures too.
Well, I would challenge that. I wouldn't disagree necessarily, and I won't take a right wing approach, but I will disagree that the text doesn't say God killed them. Like you're putting that in the text, and to me, and this isn't my ideas, but it was like Rayborn Johnson, Kevin Miller, Michael Hardin, and Brad Jerzak read Acts 5 as kind of like the fall of the church, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And to me, it reads, and I read this through Rene Girard lens, the French anthropologist who came up with mimetic theory. I read this as almost a mythology where people, Ananias and Sapphira, it reads as if God killed them, mm-hmm. but to me, that's how like all mythology reads, where the victim of violence is done away with so that the community can continue to go on. And that's to me what it reads as. You know, if you've got Romulus and Remus, this ancient murder myth of Rome, Remus gets killed, Romulus is the founder of Rome, all hail Romulus. And it's like, oh wow, what about Remus, you know? Was he such a bad guy? So in this, it's like, I wouldn't disagree that I wouldn't take the right-wing approach and say this is like God approving of capitalism or private property, but to me it reads as a mythology that papers over a murder. I would hesitate to add like my theology does not have God killing people in it, mm-hmm. So I don't read that into the text. And a lot of right-wing Christians who do have a violent theology, penal substitution atonement, they have hell as eternal torment, they have all these violent things within God. Like I would hesitate really strongly to read that into the text.
Yeah. Well, I think there's three ways you can essentially read it. You know, you can read it as mythology. None of this happened. They're describing, they're telling a story to tell people, yeah, no, this type of behavior is not acceptable. So that's one reading of it. Two, a literal reading of events, which if you read it like that, yeah, it sounds like the apostles killed those two people because they didn't bring them all of the money they had. And then I think the third interpretation of this is that this is essentially symbolic, and really like the death in this is a spiritual death as opposed to a literal death. But like when I'm talking about that, I don't think there's a God running around killing people. What I'm thinking about is that this is their way of saying, this type of behavior is completely unacceptable. So yeah, I mean, you can read it multiple ways. That's the beautiful thing about scripture. But the one thing that I think we can take from that beyond anything else is, at least at this point in the church, private property and keeping back money for yourself, especially after you've claimed to have donated everything that you have to the church, is just completely unacceptable. And I think if you take that biblical approach, well, then maybe, what's the guy, Joel Osteen, the prosperity gospel people, are obviously directly in conflict with everything about Christianity.
Well, so, and I will say that reading that you just put out or just said, like, that also has the danger of taking the pendulum too far, and church power structures saying you must do this and give to the church, or else you will be like Ananias and Sapphira, and they align themselves with Peter, like we're the head of something, and it becomes hierarchical. And see, that's where I think it becomes a problem. And like, in a kind of an ironic thing where I would agree that the early church was very communistic, but even in that system, it seemed that it led to hierarchy where it's like you force the communism on others, and you're the one who's kind of running the show.
But is that not what happens?
It happens in everything. I think it happens with human beings because we're all pretty fucked up.
I have so many possible notes now. By the way, shout out to Brad for hitting my favorite Mennonite Eastern Orthodox Christian, Brad Jerzak. A lot of people don't know he was a Mennonite before he became Orthodox, and he's a Universalist. No hell.
Yeah.
So,
although I don't think he would use the term, but he hesitates, and I've talked to Brad many times about this. But we all know what he's doing. Yeah.
Right. He's trying not to piss off the hierarchy.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right.
That's why I love David Bentley Hart. I'm sure you've heard of him. So because he doesn't care about pissing anybody off.
No, and he's way smarter than everyone, so he can.
In his own mind. That said, I need to pull a thread here. So I'm just going to say one of the reasons I have such faith in the idea of communal and by communal communism, socialism, global sharing is I currently rent from a commune. And for 9 years of my life, I lived here and was trying to become a part of the commune. This commune was founded by Mennonites in 1957. I think I mentioned it already, that they've been in existence since 1957. And studying the way that they pull it off without having any way for anybody to really cheat and rip the whole system off. I mean, they did a really good job. I mean, yes, occasionally you'll get somebody who like worms their way in and sort of becomes a freeloader. That happens. Every commune has had that. But I'm talking about hierarchy, people in power using it and socking away, some money and then running away with money. That's never happened in this community. In these, since 1957, they've been pretty well mannered, and Mennonites tend to be pretty well mannered. So yes, the dark side of human nature, and that's what the Ananias and Sapphira story is really about, in a sense. And by the way, there is a Christian rock song by my favorite communal Christian rock band called Resurrection Band called Ananias and Sapphira. Google it; it's on YouTube. It's really trippy and kind of psychedelic, but it might be fun to listen to it because I've never heard of any other song about Ananias and Sapphira. At any rate, like I said, yes, there is the dark side of human nature. I mean, that's Christianity 101, the Garden of Eden, and I still want to believe. I still want to be an optimist. I still call myself, I believe that the world can become a better place than it is. And Jesus, to me, Jesus believed that. He did kind of seem to expect divine intervention, and I'm a little more skeptical about that. I said I was an agnostic, and I would call myself a pantheist. I wouldn't say I was a monotheist, interventionist God. Don't really believe in that. But Jesus, I couldn't get away from Jesus. I tried for more than a decade to not think about Jesus at all, and eventually it caught up to me. So here we are. And I don't know if I have it. Yeah. That's all I have.
Well, if I could redirect this, unless somebody has an immediate reaction to what was just said. So this is kind of what you got me thinking of. So Watts has a very interesting theory on Jesus and the Gospels, and I would recommend this to anybody who hasn't heard it yet. You can look it up, just Google Alan Watts, Jesus, his religion. And Watts's interpretation of the Gospels and of what Jesus is saying when he says, for instance, like, the kingdom of God is within you. He is arguing that Jesus had two teachings, the exoteric teaching and the esoteric teaching. The exoteric is what he gives to the people who are not part of his inner circle. We would kind of compare this within Buddhism to what's called skillful or expedient means, which is you meet people on their level and you tell them what they need to hear to move in the proper direction towards the truth, as opposed to giving it to them right then and there. So essentially what Watts argues is that Jesus had essentially experienced what is oftentimes called a kensho, or satori is kensho, which lasts longer. You can see this also in the writing Dostoevsky's The Idiot. Dostoevsky experienced a kensho right before he was set to be executed, and then it stopped. So Jesus, being from the religious tradition that he is, when he experiences this psychological state in his 30s, and suddenly realizes essentially that everything is connected and that he is a function of this universe, and this universe as it experiences is a function of him. He might say something along the lines of, I and the Father are one. He who has seen me has seen the Father. He's not necessarily making an exclusive claim to this, because he says the kingdom of God is within you, or the kingdom of God is within man. So Watts's theory here,
right? I mean, simplified is, right? It was Jesus the Son of God, or are we all
in Jesus's view, or I'm sorry, in Watts's view and in my view, son of is essentially like of the nature of, as in son of a bitch. Or in the Arabic, like son of a dog, son of a donkey. So Jesus is the Son of God, but so is everyone else, and everything else. And so, there's not really a reason to put on airs about it. And it also doesn't make sense to, say, for instance, have a war or hoard possessions or try to lord over everyone else, because ultimately we are the same thing. We are the universe experiencing itself. We are the universe eyeing. So that's kind of the cliff notes of what it has. Watts makes a much stronger argument for this and ties it into a lot of scripture. So I would highly recommend people check out that lecture. Also phenomenal to fall asleep to.
Reminding me of the time I fell asleep listening to Herbert Marcuse. Anyway, I like Herbert Marcuse, but I fell asleep listening to him.
Oh man, I don't want to know what you dreamed there. But yeah, so like, I mean, part of what Watts has argued, and I think this is reasonable, is that by taking Jesus and essentially canonizing him, making him the one and only begotten Son of God, in the popular Christian interpretation, what they've essentially done is they've taken the real actual gospel and the real radical message of it, and they have essentially killed it and suppressed it.
But in a capitalist structure, doesn't that make sense to claim a monopoly on the only key to the kingdom?
Yes.
Yeah, but what's ironic and unfortunate, and I'll agree with you, Brenton, is that if that is the case, then why don't we listen more to what Jesus said? Because to me, what's striking isn't that we claim Jesus is God. There were lots of sons of God or offspring of God or emissaries from God. But the claim Jesus makes about himself, he's making about all of us. Like
Yes.
that's where I'm with Watts. And it's like, okay, if Jesus is the Son of God, what did Jesus say about us? He called us brothers and sisters. He saw us as, like he saw us all as serving each other mutually. He was washing feet. Like, okay, cool. Jesus is the Son of God, but what is the Son of God saying about us? Brothers, I mean, if my brother is the son of my mom and he calls me his brother, I'm also of my mom.
Yep.
I mean, it kind of makes, it's common sense, right?
Well, yeah.
So I have a communist take on the sonship of Jesus as Son of God. And it goes back to our friends Romulus and Remus. So Romulus supposedly was created by a god. I don't know if it was Jupiter, coming down and impregnating his mother. That's how he was birthed. And Remus too. But then of course, Remus was like Cain and Abel. He was discarded. Remus got discarded. And Romulus becomes the founder of the city of Rome and a king. And when he is, I think, assassinated, the story is that he rose into heaven. And so that story framed the history of the Roman Empire, and all of the emperors, well, before, Julius Caesar, who created the empire out of the Republic, claimed that he had been ascended to heaven after Brutus killed him, right? And Augustus was, in Jesus' own time, Augustus was claimed to be a god, and sons of God. So son of God, for a Jewish rabbi to have that title put upon him. Now, I don't think Jesus really ever used it of himself. I realize that in the Gospel of John, he seems to, but I don't trust the Gospel of John for history. It is, to me, obviously a theological embroidery of what is more historical in the first three Gospels. And so this Son of God that gets thrust upon Jesus is in a sense saying, you are greater than Caesar. The divinity that you are is the ability to liberate the people from empire. And so you read it that way, the sonship of God, of Jesus as the Son of God, makes sense because they're trying to counteract the Roman myth, which turned out to be successful because we got the Roman Catholic Church out of it. But then you get the Pope as the Son of God. Anyway, I don't want to go there. But my point is that what was happening was a intertextual argument about who had the right to determine the direction of human history, the Roman emperor or this poor little crucified rabbi from Galilee. And I know who I side with in that conflict.
Absolutely. It's very interesting, actually, that Tolkien. Matt brought him up earlier, but he has. I think the phrase is actually in the Bible that God picks the weak to confound the powerful, and very much like that's what the Hobbit not the Hobbit, but that's what Lord of the Rings is about, essentially. Yeah. And you can feel a lot of the Catholic energy baked into it, and you can also feel like there's a lot of anarchistic elements in the Lord of the Rings, and later on in life, Tolkien actually said like he was more and more sympathizing with the anarchists, which is a crazy thing for like an English gentry professor to say.
And a Catholic.
Yep.
But
but
we have Dorothy Day, right, in the United States, who her and Peter Marin invented Catholic anarchism in a sense. So it's not so wild that Tolkien had tendencies there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, now how much of British romantic literature is that?
Anarchistic?
Eschewing of the industrialization of Britain, definitely, right? Like from Wordsworth to Keats, there's a strong tradition there, like of. And again, here's the problem though. It is very easy to write from your country manner. Oh, I don't like those factories up in Birmingham. They're dirty. while benefiting from the entire system.
But also, so there's a great YouTube video by Otten Shea, I think is how you say his name. He does a lot of like historical stuff centered around St. Louis, and he has a character which I highly recommend that everyone check out, which is the Witchfinder General. It's basically like him doing a character of like this witch hunter from like the 1700s or something, and he created a wonderful documentary, short documentary, it's like an hour, called The Defense of Puritanism, and links the history of the Puritans with the movements of the Diggers and the Levelers. And in a lot of ways, you can see the story of the Pilgrims and the Puritans coming to America, is in a lot of ways, it has an element of class struggle to it, in just the same way that like what the Diggers did when they tried to reclaim the commons had a very strong religious and class warfare element to it.
Interesting. I mean, the problem with so much of this is it gets lost in creation myths, right? So the European take on the Puritans is very different from the American one, where they're seen as these wonderful heroes in America who fled religious persecution to start a new land in the land of freedom. Whereas in Europe, they were like, oh, these were the guys that tried to ban Shakespeare and smash all our stained glass windows. Thank God they fucked off to America to be but
Yeah.
They weren't, free from persecution. They used to be in power to persecute a bunch of people, and as soon as we had enough of their shit, they went to America to persecute people over there. And we were like, good riddance.
Which they did. I mean, like Providence. I used to live in East Providence, Rhode Island. Like that, Roger Williams founded that area because he was being persecuted up in Mass. So it's like. The persecution, it's kind of like the Reformation when the Protestants turn around and persecute and kill their first Anabaptists within 10 years of the Reformation.
Oh my God, I just realized it's leftists. It's the purity spiral. I don't know. So I did a lot with Occupy Wall Street.
It's just people.
Yeah, you see it online a lot. Again, the world of the Asheras, where you begin to develop a slightly higher consciousness, and as a result, you have the desire to appear righteous. And you begin to feel righteous, but it's a very egotistical kind of righteousness that requires you to be superior to everyone else. So like that I've seen that take apart leftist organizations in real life. I have seen it constantly cycle again and again and again, especially online, where everyone and everything is problematic. And and interestingly enough, to put this back on the case of Jesus, no one is without sin, because
let them cast the first
exactly.
stone.
So, I think probably there is an element within these religious traditions that it's almost kind of a cyclical battle of progress and reaction. A battle of liberty and hierarchy, and different groups of humans go through it in different ways, but it seems that the cycle does continuously repeat, whether it's the Diggers eventually turning into the Puritans, and burning some witches, or it's the early Christians eventually turning into the Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Empire.
Sounds like we needed Marx a few thousand years ago as well, not just Jesus.
Well,
either that or Marx could be online right now with a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So, look, I mean, the first episode of this podcast was talking about cringe atheists and how they follow the same patterns as well, right? Like, I've pointed out some atheist creation myths. I've heard stories of the burning of the great Library of Alexandria, which was blamed upon these religious types, which is just so ironic because if you look at the mythology of the great Library of Alexandria, I think at one point Christians blamed it on Muslims, Muslims blamed it on Christians. Catholic Protestants blame it on Catholics. It's a suitable moral parable for whichever enemy you have in mind at the time, right? Like,
well, you can't know that you're the good people.
Likewise with World War.
Yeah.
Unless you have some bad people to point.
Yeah,
a
exactly.
At.
Yeah. Those people over there have to suck so I can be great.
Yeah, and the obvious example is like World War II, right? Like, so it's very easy for people to blame Hitler on either because he was a Christian, or because he was an atheist, or because he was a vegan. If you strongly believe in the power of eating meat. Likewise, I learned, Stalin's murders are given as examples of the problems with atheism, right? Especially during the Red Scare, that seemed to be a big part of the fomentation of the Christian right.
Yeah, but that's really interesting with Stalin, because does anybody know like what track Stalin was on before he became a Bolshevik?
He actually was a seminarian, training for the priesthood.
Training for the priesthood, and
I'm not surprised at all, right?
his method of controlling people, that was actually like the method a priest used at this seminary. That particular seminary was known for creating atheists, by the way, because it was just like the people running it were just absolute bastards. But there was this guy, he was nicknamed Black Spot, and he was constantly trying to get Stalin expelled and spying on Stalin and getting people to like inform on Stalin and turn him in. And eventually, like, that level of abuse, created the...
You can criticize them. Mm-hmm. Clearly their system worked. Like, he rose to great success.
Now we're pragmatists.
He had a very good career.
Works.
Yeah.
I did find it interesting again when I was, because I was quite religious, and then 15, 16 sort of, especially because I was in boarding school, and the church was a home away from home. And when they didn't have answers to my questions about power structures, and maybe this has been corrupted by the Holy Roman Empire, and sort of sent me away, and I felt quite betrayed and hurt by that. Which is odd, because the only thing, if you're an atheist, you believe that religious people have an imaginary friend, but being real, a lot of atheists have an imaginary enemy, and that seems even weirder to me, to be there hating God. You don't believe exists, but you're like,
it's necessary. You have to create an other. You just have to. I mean, I don't mean that a good thing either. We all have our others. I mean, I like to hate on Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, but in a sense, they're human too. But there is a system that they have power, and so that's where I think you do have to kind of draw a line. Is are people? Is this person's arrogance and stupidity actually got enough force behind it to hurt a lot of people? And I would say yes. So the individual idiot who can't do anything, I don't worry about. But the idiots who, and I don't know, Stalin is a funny case for me. He was a true believer. If you read anything he ever wrote, and they exhumed all of these things he wrote while he was in power, he was a true believer. He really thought he was on the threshold of having the breakthrough to create true communism in the world. Mm-hmm. So you can't pass him off as a hypocrite. He was a true believer. Mm-hmm. I liked Lenin a little better. He was Lenin was a little more self-critical. He really understood, and he, especially after the Bolshevik Revolution, he realized, oh my God, this could go terribly wrong. And Stalin made sure that anybody who thought that way was forced out.
But I think that happens time and time again, though, when someone gets the power not through genius or popularity, but through pure ruthlessness, that they kind of go destiny, right? Like destiny. I see that happen time and time again with tyrants. They're there because they willed it to be so. Their own will was what made it happen, and at that point, how do you concede? Well, I might be a bit fucked up. I might need some therapy. I might be wrong about a few things, like you don't. Those doors have been firmly closed behind you. So, and
I think
anyone that had the
yeah.
keys, you've killed.
Generally, once you get to power, that's not how you get to power, is by being self-critical and going to therapy. Because those of us who go to therapy and things like that, like at the end of months of therapy, you're not sitting there, I need to take over some shit, or I need to run some shit. We're generally just like,
right.
It's like, no, I need to be self-critical, self-evaluated, introspective, and all those things.
Power is not something any sensible
I went
person
to
wants.
India. Sorry.
No, no.
Yeah, no, I went to India a few years ago, and that country is fucking massive. And I can't imagine being the first British person that showed up here and went, right, who's in charge? Not any longer. I'll be taking that position. Thank you very much. Like, mental. But anyway, to tie it together, I had this atheist creation myth, right, going on, that the church was complacent in so much evil in the world that it just lost any right to any moral authority, and it should just be placed accordingly. And I don't want to get into that debate because we've all had it and we all know where it goes. But just interestingly, I had this position that the church was complicit with the Nazis, right? And during the Holocaust and da. And when you actually study the history, it's much more complex than that. Even to the point where it was the Catholics and the communists fighting side by side against the Nazis in 1930s Germany, like in the streets. The people that were fighting the Nazis, you will hear about the Nazis fighting, and they were fighting the communists and the Catholic Church by their side.
Well, I've had so many Catholic friends of mine say, "Oh yeah, Catholicism is essentially communism," and I'm like, it should be, because Jesus supposedly inspired it, but there is that whole, the Pope is the top of the heap. But anyway,
I've always this is the problem when you like put somebody on a giant golden throne and do whatever they like, you cannot serve God.
You're not about to speak against the Queen of. You're not about to speak against the Queen of England now.
We're Americans. We can talk about anybody we want.
That's sacrilegious, I'm afraid. Like that's my line. You can insult God on this podcast. You cannot insult the Queen.
I would insult the Queen, but I'd worry she would. The same thing that happened to Diana would happen to me.
Oh God.
Oh.
And did you get that from QAnon?
What? No. Who did I get that from?
Heard it. I'm just kidding. It's a conspiracy theory like QAnon. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Oh boy, QAnon. You should do one on QAnon, Chris.
I should say you should not do one on QAnon.
What? Sorry, where's the nuance to be had there? Like this is every time the topic.
There's no. That will be very binary. That shit
right?
crazy.
Maybe I'll have a guest on and I'll just be like, right, you're an idiot. We don't agree on anything. Nice talking to you. Take care.
Maybe we can find some nuance between like whether or not we should be worshiping JFK Jr. or Sasquatch.
I think the nuance of the discussion would be: should we have you arrested or put in a mental institution? That would be the QAnon debate right there.
Well, I think it's ableism to put them in an institution. So
yeah.
Lock him up.
So what do you guys think about the current Pope? Is he a socialist? I'm a big fan of the Franciscans. They obviously spoke truth to power often during the Catholic Church's reign of terror. They were one of the few sects able to, because they renounced money, right?
Well, if I can on this, because I love me some Catholics. I have one of my first, a really good friend of mine was a Catholic spiritual director. In fact, my current spiritual director, what am I saying, is a Catholic. But she's actually a nun, or not a nun. She's an order. She's in an order. She is unmarried and in an order, served as a chaplain, a hospital chaplain, trainer for decades. But Pope Francis, I mean, he comes from Argentina, right? I want to get that right. Yeah. And liberation theology was very hot in the years that he was there. There are stories about him betraying some of the left-wing Catholic priests, but there have also been trouble making any of that stuff stick. And when he came into office, he said a lot of really, almost like he's going to allow women to be priests, and he's going to allow, and he skirted a fine line. But I think over now at the, however many years he's been in power, he's no longer trying to make everybody like him. So he's willing to say, no, we're never going to have women priests. No, we're never going to let homosexuals, take communion. I think he's finally, he's now established. He's not the bright, wow.
Right. So he had a lot of promise.
I think he really didn't live up to it.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. Right? Yeah.
Perfect. Because Obama wasn't even wasn't even Obama. Yeah. There was so much mythology about Obama when he ran for office. I'm from Chicago. We knew him. We knew him already.
Yeah. So I'm bisexual. So if someone's not 100% affirming, like I know you're part of the system and all that kind of stuff, and you got this hierarchy, and it's a lot more complex. But
no, you're the fucking
exactly.
Like there's certain hierarchies where you're like, what are they gonna do? Vote you out of office?
So
bro, like you're the fucking
if you can't
Pope.
affirm us, you can fuck off. That's just where I'm at.
Yeah, it's like Biden with a majority Senate being like, my hands are tied. What can I do? You could do something.
Yeah, it was when I first discovered Dorothy Day and the Catholic Workers. I thought maybe I could be a Catholic, but now I'm back to Unitarian Universalism, as about as unorthodox of a kind of religion as you can have. But
it wasn't always that way. Unitarians, like around the time of like the founding fathers and immediately after, were the strongest like group of Christians in the country. Like a lot of the
for a very short period of time. But yes, they came out of the whole landed gentry of the New England. Yeah, they were definitely an elite church, and it shows. I mean, we are our ministers, and I am not in this group, make more money than anybody except Episcopal priests. So, or rabbis and Episcopal priests. It's like rabbis are the most, Episcopal priests, then Unitarian ministers. I don't do this because I am a working class Unitarian Universalist minister, and a lot of churches don't know what to do with me. So I have only had like one job since I left seminary. Although again, if you cross your fingers, you bow to whatever ritual you can perform in my favor, I may get a job. I'm probably going to get at least one job offer next week and maybe two. So
I'll chant for you to find success and happiness.
Charley, I beg of you, please, because this happens far too often, right? Someone like the Pope makes all the left-wing noises, and then they get in a position of power, and then they betray the system. I need you to do the other thing. I need you to lie and tell everyone.
Use my power.
Capitalist. Yes, promise that you'll use your power to siphon the money up. Call it trickle-down economics or whatever you want. I'll be like, and then when you get in power in a senior position in church, be like, "Wah! I've been communist all along, you fools."
No, I probably lost plenty of interviews and job offers because I put my politics right in my packet, the profile that they see, and so it's always an honor when a church decides that I'm worth an interview. But I'm not going to get wealthy. I'm not planning to. I'm 59. That probably isn't. I don't know if it's obvious. The gray beard, maybe. I'm 59. My wife is heading towards retirement, so I have to make enough money to support the both of us when she retires in a few years. But I've never had a lot of money. I've always been poor. I've always, we've had 2 kids. I raised 2 kids in Chicago. It's expensive to raise kids in Chicago. Yep. So, but I also I'm hoping that there was a thought I had, and I don't want to lose it. And I did. So that's okay.
Well, you mentioned something about like losing, losing job offers because you put your politics on there. But in a way, you can think of that as dodging bullets, because
Right.
that was another, because then you're stuck with that congregation. Watts actually talked about this because he was a minister. And there were a lot of ministers who had very complex, they were very educated people with really interesting theology, and they weren't allowed to preach what they wanted to preach. They had to preach the stuff that made the rich people that gave all the money to the church, they had to give them what they wanted to hear. And what they wanted to hear was that old time religion where everybody's got to respect authority and let them keep all of their money.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's, and I mean, the Unitarians are trying to move away consciously from that kind of privileged white middle class religiosity, and it's a hard nut to crack. So, my home congregation was the biggest church in the Unitarian Universalist, or the Unitarian Association, before there was a merger. So Unitarianism and Universalism were two different denominations that merged, and the Unitarian one being the bigger one. And the People's Church of Chicago, don't you love that name? The People's Church of Chicago was brought into mega church status by a very talented speaker by the name of Preston Bradley. He actually sat on various committees in the city of Chicago, so he was kind of up there, but he had 4,000 members and 3 services a Sunday. It was that kind of thing back in the 40s and 50s, right? But then he left, or he retired, and nobody could hold a candle to this guy. So this gigantic church with a tiny little congregation of mostly poor people who show up on Sundays. And that was the church I joined because it was so un-Unitarian in a real sense. Mm-hmm. And they had a homeless shelter in their building. They had a daily lunch service. Jesus said, feed the hungry and care for the prisoner and the homeless. I just, all that matters to me. And they were one of the few churches that was really trying to do it. And so anyway, that's how I ended up UU. I was a Quaker at that point, but I said I wanted to be a professional minister, and Quakers don't really do that. Mm-hmm. So the UUs were where I landed.
Oh yeah, well with the Quakers, my grandmother became a Quaker, and she was buried in a Quaker cemetery. Her ashes were. If I'm not mistaken, they don't have a big pulpit because and anybody can speak. It's very interesting because we were talking earlier about the early church and how it got kind of bound up with the Romans. And the thing is that I think one of the problems is that what's happened is that people use metaphors specifically for God that really that aren't. Their metaphors are wrong. It is a idol that they have built, not of I guess stone or wood, but of thoughts. And if you look at how they refer to God in the scriptures, it's the Lord, the King, and God is kind of compared to these ancient dictatorial kings of the Near East. And so there's plenty of sects of Christianity, that take that image of God very, very seriously, when it would seem to me that the obvious thing there is they're just talking about God in these terms because that kind of political structure is the only political structure that a lot of these people have ever known.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, Jesus subverted the king paradigm in a real way. But sorry, go ahead, Matthew.
No, and I was just going to say exactly that. And I think even the language of Lord, if you think of lordship, and then you think, well, what did that Lord do? Oh, he washed people's feet. He served. Mm-hmm. So I think that's also being intentional in terms of using the same type of language to subvert the already supposed idea of whatever that is.
That is fascinating. I've never considered it that way.
It's kind of like it's kind of like reclaiming the word queer in the queer community. Mm-hmm. It's how Black folks have reclaimed the N-word, and
and some of us are reclaiming the C word, communism.
Sure. I thought you were going to say the other C word. But...
I had you going.
Well, I mean, in a way, I feel like the current left libertarian movement in the United States is an attempt to, reclaim communism and reclaim socialism, because for the longest time, the two largest empires the world has ever known, the USSR and the United States, both claimed that the USSR was communist. And it was for completely different reasons.
And they were both lying, but for different reasons.
Yeah. The Russians wanted the prestige. They wanted to be the I guess, avatar of the hopes and dreams of, generation after generation of workers. And the United States and our allies, their allies, wanted to associate communism and socialism with the USSR because the USSR was creepy and authoritarian and horrible in a number of ways. So, both of them wanted the same thing. They wanted it for opposite reasons. And now, you just try to have a conversation with someone about, I don't know, maybe we shouldn't let people die on the street if they can't afford food or shelter or medicine, and they call you a communist.
Right.
So, we do have to be there to make that change, to subvert that idea. And that's so cool that, there is a reading of Christianity where they are subverting the idea of the Lord. So yeah, Matt, thank you for putting that into my head. I don't think I would have thought of that on my own.
And when people use communism or socialism as a pejorative, I simply ask them, and I work with folks who are disabled and cerebral palsy and things like that. I ask them just straight up, if they're 100% like a capitalist, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I say, are they supposed to work? They literally physically can't work a 40-hour work week, but are they supposed to work? And if not, are you going to give them the money? Is the church going to? I mean, we have to set up some sort of system for them, correct? And they always tend to agree with me because I tell them, I work with these folks. They're a fall hazard if they get too tired. They can't work all day. So what are they supposed to do? And aren't you then advocating for at least some sort of socialism? At least some sort of something.
Oh, I mean, I know the conversation's so warped in America, but anytime I meet someone that really is that free market fundamentalist, faith-based,
that's the real religion of
I
this
call it,
Christian
right?
nation.
Yeah. And I just say to them, look, you know what, guys, just be done with it. Why don't you privatize your fire service? Because that's what they had in ancient Rome, right? Just dudes going around being like, oh, your house is on fire.
You want to pay me to put it out?
I'd be happy to, give me half your house and I'll put the fire out.
The funny thing is that actually happened in the United States. We had private police and private fire. They fought each other. You can see it in the movie Gangs of New York. And like
you can still see it happening in Paris now.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Every time there's a riot, you see the firefighters fighting the police.
One of
and by the way, Brent, you guys have private prison systems.
Yes, we
and people working. If something has a "Made in America" tag on it these days, it's likely to be made by someone in a prison for a corporation getting paid less than minimum wage.
Yep. Yeah, indeed. Like 17 cents an hour, and that's the high end. That's if you're working in a federal prison. I think it's even less than that if it's a private prison. Probably. And of course, these private prisons have contracts that guarantee 90% occupancy. So, giant. Is it really any wonder that the United States we are 4% of the world's population, but we have 25% of the prisons?
25. Yep. Exactly.
Number one.
Maybe we should preempt that with the Nazis. They do that 1350 thing. We'll just say 425, but that's too close to 420.
Yeah, it nearly sounds cool. That's the problem. So, gentlemen, I think probably Marx would have something to say about that. I'm sure Jesus would as well. Here's the question for you. I think talking in the round with you all, it's become increasingly clear to me that Jesus was definitely a socialist, and he would have agreed with a lot of what Marx had to say. Here's a question I want to provoke from you. Do you think Jesus would have joined the Christian church as it stands today?
Absolutely not.
Jesus was Jewish and never not Jewish, so I don't think so.
I think he would have looked for a synagogue. Chicago has the distinction of having the first anti-Zionist Jewish congregation. Google Zedek Chicago, TZEDK Chicago, Rabbi Brent Rosen. You might want to have him on here. Can you be Jewish and anti-Zionist? Brent, Brant, Rosen, Rosen, Zedek Chicago congregation. Anyway, that's where Jesus would go to church. Synagogue, sorry.
Jesus, he was a religious reformer, So obviously he would be a religious reformer today, just like he was back then. He would be challenging the powerful. He would be challenging the wealthy. He would be pointing out, that it is more difficult for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to go to heaven. And it's really interesting because like they always talk about, like, there's that one sort of conspiracy theory on that there was like this one gate that was really narrow and that you had a hard time passing through it.
No. Some rich idiots actually built that gate. I honestly, that conversation was had and there was that conspiracy theory, and then some rich idiots actually built that gate to be like, hey, we're getting into heaven.
It's funny too, because the minister who first told me about that, who was Episcopalian, now I know he was paid very well, but he actually almost was Buddhist with it, because he said that he gave us that story about the very narrow thing that a camel couldn't pass through. So what did you have to do to get your camel through there? You gave up your possessions. You removed them from the from the camel in order to reach the kingdom of heaven, and that rings very, very true to me as a metaphor for Buddhism and for enlightenment, because it really is you have to give up so many aspects of your attachment to like the material reality. You have to stop clinging to those things in order to become enlightened.
Gentlemen, any final thoughts?
I have a quote. I'm trying to pull it up from Marx. And this is, you've all heard the opium of the masses, but I don't know if you've read the paragraph that precedes that. And it's actually, as a liberation Christian communist, it's exactly what I think is true about religion. And I am trying to pull it up. I wish I had it like right at my fingertips, but I don't exactly. So someone else can say something, and then I'll pull it up.
Lovely. Matthew, any?
Yeah, well, I'll end with a quote too. We mentioned Tolkien a few times. I am a huge Tolkien nerd. The quote, the world isn't in your books and maps, it's out there. So going back to our talk about scripture, our talk about the Bible, I think many Christians have a view of the Bible that prevents them from truly living in the present moment in the world. And, books are great. I write them, so I do want people to read books. I have a huge map of Middle Earth, so I also love maps. But that's not the world. The world is in experiencing, that which is in front of us.
So this may make you hate me, but I literally just rewatched the whole Hobbit trilogy, and I enjoyed it.
I will say this as a Tolkien
the most
nerd,
controversial statement of the podcast. Wow.
It's not a great. It's not fantastic. It's not as good as Jackson's films. Obviously, it's not as good as the books, but it's not as bad as some people say.
That's what I would say.
I had problems with it, but
Yeah, I found the quote. So this comes from a text called The Introduction to a Critique of Hegel's Philosophy of Right. Remember, Hegel was the sort of philosopher he contrasted himself to. And it says, religious suffering is at one and the same time the expression of real suffering and a protest against real suffering. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. It's very different when you read the whole thing in context.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's always taken out of context, isn't it? Yeah.
People sure love to do that. Wow.
So with that, I'm going to bid you adieu. My wife is due home at any minute from her retreat. So, and it's getting late here.
Something we can all empathize with. You've got to get ready for that. Gentlemen, it's been wonderful. Thank you all so
Whoa,
much.
I didn't get to say my thing.
Go ahead.
I'll
stay
on, then
another
you
minute.
say your thing.
Okay, yeah. So you wanted to read something. This is from, and I mentioned the Prophet by Khalil Gibran. This is a short reading from one of them. Then a priestess said, "Speak to us of prayer." And he answered, saying, "You pray in your distress and in your need. Would that you might pray also in the fullness of your joy and in your days of abundance. For what is prayer but the expansion of yourself into the living ether? And if it is for your comfort to pour your darkness into space, it is also for your delight to pour the dawning of your heart. And if you cannot but weep when your soul summons you to prayer, she should spur you again and yet again through weeping until you shall come to laughing. When you pray, you rise to meet in the air those who are praying at that very hour, and whom save in prayer you may not meet. Therefore, let your visit to that temple invisible be for naught but ecstasy and sweet communion. For if you should enter the temple for no other purpose than asking, you shall not receive. And if you should enter into it to humble yourself, you shall not be lifted. Or even if should you enter it to beg for others, you shall not be heard. It is enough that you enter into the temple of the invisible. I cannot teach you how to pray in words.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. If you have any links for anything you want to promote, I strongly recommend it, and I'll be happily add it in the show notes.
I'll send you some. Yeah,
really
I'll send you
enjoyed
some. All right, Chris.
it.
And
Please
Matthew,
all
nice to
send
meet
me
you, and
your-
Brent.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, this has been
Thank you.
awesome.